Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be a little bit of a longer one because I'm going to talk to you about all of my favorites of the year that I've read and watched. I'm going to be talking about books and films. I don't talk about films a lot on this channel. I have mentioned some before, but I am also just as much a film lover as I am a book lover, and so I thought I would talk about my favorite films and series and documentaries of the year as well. So I have 9 books, 11 films, 6 series, 2 documentaries and 1 short film to talk about. So without further ado, we're going to get straight into it because otherwise I'm going to be sitting here for an hour. The first book I want to talk to you about is the first book I read this year, and I'm going to officially name it my favorite book of the year. Even though it's not the end of the year yet and I still have a few books to read, I don't think any other book that I might read this year is going to surpass this one. So, The Beautiful Indifference by Sarah Hall. The blurb says, "From the speed and heat of summer London to the heathered fells and lowlands of Cumbria, with their history of smouldering violence, to an eerie still lake in the Finnish wilderness, Sarah Hall evokes landscapes with extraordinary precision and grace. The characters within these territories are real-life survivors, but whether it's a frustrated housewife seeking extreme experience, or a young woman contemplating the death of her lover, dark devices and desires rise to the surface. And the human body too, flawed, visceral, and full of emotional conflict, provides a sensuous frame for each unfolding drama." These short stories were all so good, and so weird, and some of them were disturbing, some of them were just really eerie, and all of them, I mentioned this when I spoke about this book at the beginning of the year, but all of them were a little bit obsessive. Everything, or all of the characters in them, I felt were a little bit obsessed with something in the story. And also the way that Sarah Hall writes is a little bit obsessive, to me at least. And so it's my favorite book of the year, and I'm so glad to have read it. I'm so sad I didn't bring it with me from South Africa because I would love to reread it, but I'm also really excited to buy more of Sarah Hall's works and read more of her books in the future. Then, the next one I have is The Past in Hiding by Mark Roseman, which is I was going to say a memoir, but it's a biography. It says, "A heart-stopping survivor story and brilliant historical investigation that offers unprecedented insights into the daily life in the Third Reich and the powers and pitfalls of memory." So basically this is a biography of a young Jewish woman during the Second World War whose family managed to evade being sent to concentration camps for most of the war, but then eventually were also sent away. However, she escaped and she lived underground for 2 years, for the last 2 years of the war. It chronicles the time in which both she and her family were still living at home and what they had to endure throughout that, and then it chronicles her time being underground and being helped by certain people to stay hidden and having to move often to avoid being found and all of those things. And I found it really interesting because it's a very personal insight into the Second World War, whereas most of what we learn in school and from films and all that is always just a very broad view. So I found it very interesting to see a personal kind of history of that, and I found also that the book was really well researched and really well written, which I very much enjoyed. Then, next I have Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield. When Leah finally returns after a deep-sea mission that ended in catastrophe, her wife Mary knows that something is wrong. Whatever happened in that vessel stranded on the ocean floor, Leah has carried part of it with her onto dry land and into their home. As Mary searches for answers to her wife's altered state, she must face the possibility that the woman she loves is slipping from her grasp. This book was also really riveting. I'm not usually a person that enjoys multiple perspectives in the same book. I found this story really intriguing and really fascinating. And unlike anything I've ever read before, it's a little bit like magical realism, or touches on magical realism, I would say, in terms of Leah's altered state when she comes back. And yes, I found it's such a compelling story and so easy to read. I definitely recommend reading this book. It is such a good book, and I want to read more of Julia Armfield's books as well. Then I have When the Village Sleeps by Sindiwe Magona. When the Village Sleeps is a visionary novel about what the loss of identity and dignity do to a people afflicted by decades of brokenness. Told through the lives and spirits of 4 generations of Amatolo women, including the old, who speak wisdom with ever-increasing urgency, it moves between the bustling township setting of Kwanele and the different rhythms of rural village life. This is a book set in South Africa, in the townships outside or in the outskirts of Cape Town, and it follows a young girl whose family lives in poverty and her sort of ideas of how she's going to get herself out of this poverty and what she's willing to do and sacrifice in order to get herself a better life, which wouldn't necessarily be considered a better life by all, but to her it seems the best way to get herself out of that situation. And I found it a really, really well written story. I would also love to read more of Sindiwe Magona's works because I think she's a great writer, and I think it's a very accurate description of how impoverished people in South Africa live and what their struggles are and what they feel they have to do in order to better their lives. And if anybody is interested in reading a South African story that will give you a good depiction of what life is like for some of the population at least, or actually, unfortunately for a majority of the population, then I would suggest that book. Next up I have City of Girls by Elizabeth Gilbert. It says, in 1940, 19-year-old Vivian Morris has just been kicked out of Vassar College owing to her lackluster freshman year performance. Her affluent parents sent her to Manhattan to live with her Aunt Peg, who owns a flamboyant, crumbling midtown theatre called the Lily Playhouse. There, Vivian is introduced to an entire cosmos of unconventional and charismatic characters, from the fun-chasing showgirls to a sexy male actor, a grand dame actress, a lady killer writer, and a no-nonsense stage manager. But when Vivian makes a personal mistake that results in professional scandal, it turns her new world upside down in ways that it will take her years to fully understand. Ultimately, though, it leads her to a new understanding of the kind of life she craves and the kind of freedom it takes to pursue it. It will also lead to the love of her life, a love that stands out from all the rest. This story is told from the perspective of Vivian, who is, at the time of telling the story, 80-something years old, and she's now looking back at her life and telling the story of when she was a young girl and when she moved to Manhattan to live with her aunt and became embroiled with this playhouse and all of the people who work there and live there and everything that they did in 1940s New York. And part of it also takes place, well, obviously it takes place during the Second World War, but that isn't such a big theme in this book, although it is touched on and it does make an impact on some of the characters' lives. But I love this book so much. It was such a fun read. It was such a fun, riotous kind of story, and all the characters in it are so extraordinary and kind of out of this world and weird and wonderful. It just reminded me again how much I love historical fiction. Then the next one I have is We Should All Be Feminists by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. What does feminism mean today? That is the question at the heart of We Should All Be Feminists, a personal, eloquently argued essay adapted from her much-viewed TED Talk of the same name by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. With humor and levity, here Adichie offers readers a unique definition of feminism for the 21st century, one rooted in inclusion and awareness. She shines a light not only on the blatant discrimination, but also the more insidious institutional behaviors that marginalize women around the world, in order to help readers of all walks of life better understand the often masked realities of sexual politics. Throughout, she draws extensively on her own experiences in the US, in her native Nigeria, offering an artfully nuanced explanation of why the gender divide is harmful for women and men alike. Argued in the same observant, witty, and clever prose that has made Adichie a best-selling novelist, here is one remarkable author's exploration of what it means to be a woman today, and an of-the-moment rallying cry for why we should all be feminists. This is a really, really short book. I read it in under 2 hours, I think, on the plane from South Africa to Germany, and it's a very easy to read and easy to understand kind of exploration or essay, if you want, and I think more people should read it. And I want to read more of Chimamanda's books because I think she's a great writer, and I would love to read some of her fictional works as well, because this is the first one of her books that I read, and I think it was a great introduction because you get a sense of her personality and her writing style while also reading about something important. Then we have No One Is Too Small to Make a Difference by Greta Thunberg. In August 2018, a 15-year-old Swedish girl, Greta Thunberg, decided not to go to school one day in order to protest the climate crisis. Her actions sparked a global movement, inspiring millions of students to go on strike for our planet, forcing governments to listen, and earning her a Nobel Peace Prize nomination. No One Is Too Small to Make a Difference brings you Greta in her own words for the first time, collecting her speeches that have made history across the globe, from the United Nations to Capitol Hill and mass street protests. Her book is a rallying cry for why we must all wake up and fight to protect the living planet, no matter how powerless we feel. Our future depends on it. This is another one of those books where I feel like everybody should read it, and I mentioned this also in the video where I spoke about this book. I think this is a book that everybody should and can read because it's very easy to read and understand. Obviously it is written by a young woman or a teenager, so she's not using incredibly big and complex wording, and also I don't think she wrote it in Swedish and it was translated. I think she wrote in English, which is not her native language. So it's very easy to understand, very easy to read, very quick to get through as well, but I think very important for people who maybe are aware of the climate crisis but not really that informed on the topic, to read and to get just a little bit more information about how dire the situation really is. The second last book on here is Jazz by Toni Morrison. In the winter of 1926, when everybody everywhere sees nothing but good things ahead, Joe Trace, middle-aged door-to-door salesman of Cleopatra beauty products, shoots his teenage lover to death. At the funeral, Joe's wife, Violet, attacks the girl's corpse. This passionate, profound story of love and obsession brings us back and forth in time, as a narrative is assembled from the emotions, hopes, fears, and deep realities of Black urban life. I have been thinking a lot about this book since I read it. When I first read it, I was somewhat confused because I didn't quite grasp everything in the story, or I was a little bit confused because of all of the back and forth in time in the story. But now that I've let it simmer in the back of my mind for a little bit, I realized how good of a book it is and how great of a story. And I think if you haven't read Jazz by Toni Morrison, if you've read anything by Toni Morrison and you think, I like her writing style, maybe I should read more, read Jazz, because it is a really good book. And it's very visual in terms of the way that Toni Morrison writes. It's a little bit, feels a little bit cinematic in that way, and it's also a little bit like stream of consciousness writing, not as much as somebody like Virginia Woolf's writing, because she does go back and forth in time in a not so stream of consciousness way. It's not like somebody's memory, but still, nonetheless, it's a very good book, and I would recommend a lot of people read this book. The last book on my list is the most recent one, or one of the most recent ones I finished. It is Brief Answers to the Big Questions by Stephen Hawking. Hawking not only unraveled some of the universe's greatest mysteries, but also believed science plays a critical role in fixing problems here on Earth. Now, as we face immense challenges on our planet, including climate change, the threat of nuclear war, and the development of artificial intelligence, he turns his attention to the most urgent issues facing us. Will humanity survive? Should we colonize space? Does God exist? These are just a few of the questions Hawking addresses in this wide-ranging, passionately argued final book from one of the greatest minds in history. I thoroughly enjoyed this book. I found so many things in this book interesting, and what is also really great for me is that Stephen Hawking writes in a way that is easy to understand for the regular person who has no scientific background, didn't study science extensively, and he makes it really easy to understand. I really enjoyed all of his explanations of how the world works, and it made me think a lot about all of the things I learned in science classes and biology, because there were some of the things that he mentioned in his book that I learned about in high school, but obviously not as extensively as he dove into in this book, and obviously also not as extensively as he has studied it over the course of his life. And yeah, I just found it a really fascinating book, and now I really want to watch The Theory of Everything, that film that they made about his life. Now, we're going to move on to movies. This year I set myself a goal to watch 24 movies by the production company A24, because it's the year 2024, and so it was a year of 24s. But I've not yet reached that goal. I don't think I will before the end of the year, because I would still need to watch far too many films. So unless I watch an A24 film every night for the rest of the year, I don't think I will reach that goal. But I have watched some really great films by them, and some really weird films, and films that I would not recommend anybody watch. But today I'm just going to talk about my favorites. My absolute favorite that I watched this year, and I think it was even the favorite film, not only A24 film, but my favorite film of the year, is a film called Medusa Deluxe. Talented and cutthroat hairstylists at a competition find one of their own murdered before judging can begin. Winding through neon-lit halls, competitors unspool long-simmering resentments and lies as they search for the killer among them. This film was shot basically as a one-take. So the whole time the camera is just following the characters around. There are no cuts that are evident. I did a little bit of research after I watched the film, because it really intrigued me that it was all a one-take shot. They did have to cut some of the scenes. There were scenes where they were filming in front of a mirror, and obviously they had to make sure you couldn't see the cameraman, and there were some parts where obviously the actors would have messed up a line or something like that, but the way that it was all cut together, you can't even tell. It all just looks like the people all showed up on one day for 2 hours, filmed the thing from beginning to end, and then were done with it. And it looks really impressive. The colors in this film are really beautiful. The storyline is really interesting. It's one that I've never heard of before. Who writes a story about a hairstyling competition? I don't know, but I'm glad that they did. So if you're looking for a little bit of out-of-the-box kind of film to watch, I would suggest watching this one, because it was a really enjoyable film. Then the next one is Past Lives, which is also an A24 film. Nora and Haesung, two deeply connected childhood friends, are wrest apart when Nora's family emigrates from South Korea. Decades later, they reunite for one fateful week as they confront destiny, love, and the choices that make a life. It is a brilliant film. It is such a, I feel like, accurate description of how two people who are /were/are in love with each other act around each other when they see each other after a long time, and how kind of our childhood friendships or loves or whatever you want to call them influence the rest of our lives. And it was a really beautifully made film. really, really quiet. There were so many long silences between the characters, which I found really refreshing, because most films are just full of action and full of dialogue and try to keep your attention. But this one was very quiet and very kind of true to life in that sense. And I really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed it. So I would recommend people watch it. Then I have Woman Walks Ahead. A portrait painter, Catherine, travels from Brooklyn to Dakota to paint the leader of the Lakota tribe. She eventually gets caught up in the tribe's fight for their land. I love historical fiction. I'll say it again and again and again. I love historical fiction so much. The setting of this film was so beautiful. The actors did such a good job portraying all these people. The story was so heart-wrenching, but also hopeful at the end of the day. And I don't really know how to describe this story to you, but it's just a great film. And I think this, among all of the A24 films that I watched this year, most of them are a little bit weird in some ways, but this is the most, I would say, conventionally made film, and so I think it would appeal to the broadest audience. But it is really just a great film overall. All the films I'm going to talk about from now on are no longer A24 films. Desert Hearts is a 1985 film, I think, if I'm not mistaken, and it goes as follows. A romantic story about unhappy Vivian Bell, who seeks to get a divorce from her husband as she is attracted to another woman. That is the most basic description of what this story is. But that is basically what it's about. A woman who is getting a divorce from her husband goes on holiday to a small town in the middle of nowhereness, in the middle of the desert, which is why it's called Desert Hearts. Or, well, probably a part of why it's called Desert Hearts. But she goes to a holiday home, or a kind of resort, but it's not really a resort, it's just old home. A woman who is letting her stay in her house. I don't even know if it's a guest house. But then she and the woman's daughter fall in love. And it's a really beautifully shot film, and the costuming is beautiful, and all the actors portray their roles so well. Especially the main character who plays Vivian Bell, Helen. Can't remember her surname. That's unfortunate. I will put it on screen. I think she did an exceptional job of playing her character and kind of showing the hesitance of her character going into this kind of uncharted territory and this new relationship and these new feelings that she has. I think she did a brilliant job of portraying that. Next, I have Nyad. 64-year-old marathon swimmer Diana Nyad attempts to become the first person ever to swim from Cuba to Florida. This is based on a true story of Diana Nyad, who was a marathon swimmer. I think she was also an Olympic swimmer, and she tried to swim from Cuba to Florida when she was 30 something or 28 or something along those lines, and she couldn't do it. But then when she turned 60, she got a bee in her bonnet that she was going to try and swim this Cuba to Florida section again, and actually try to complete it this time. And the story follows her for 4 years as she tries several times to swim this distance, and eventually succeeds. I don't know if that's a spoiler, but I feel like if you know anything about Diana Nyad, you will already have known that, and probably also if you watch the trailer for the film, you'll know that. So, but it's a really interesting story, a really inspiring story, and we're very well acted as well. Then, the next film I have is The World Unseen. In 1950s Cape Town, progressive and free Amina. I should also say, in 1950s Cape Town, where South Africa was under apartheid. They don't mention that in this blurb, but it is a very relevant theme and kind of part of the story. So, in 1950s Cape Town, progressive and free Amina owns a cafe, co-owns a cafe with a black man named Jacob. One day, a beautiful housewife named Miriam visits the cafe and Amina is instantly smitten. Miriam runs a store outside of the town with her husband Omar and feels increasingly stifled in her conventional life. She cannot help but give in to the desire when Amina comes calling. I don't like that last sentence because that's not at all really how I found this film to be, but I guess they have to entice you with a blurb for a movie, otherwise you won't watch it. But it is about two Indian women in apartheid South Africa who meet by chance and then kind of start to form a relationship. Kind of. I don't really know if you can classify it as that. But it's a really beautifully written story by Shamim Sarif, who has written many a beautiful film. But she wrote the novel upon which this film is also based, which, spoiler, I bought the novel because I loved the film so much, so I bought the book because I want to read the book. And it is just a really lovely story. I don't know if I can actually say that about this topic because it was a really terrible time for basically everybody involved in this story. And, well, I mean, the characters, not the actors. They all seem to have had a lovely time. But the characters and the time period in which it is set was a really difficult time for a lot of people in South Africa. But I think what Shamim does so well is she touches on that, and she really beautifully and sensitively talks about those topics and kind of communicates that to the viewer without making it the main part of the story. And I don't really know how else to describe this film to you, but it's a great film, so please watch it. I'm gonna say that about every film. Then, next I have Moving On. At their best friend's funeral, when Evelyn and Claire reconnect, they join forces to seek revenge against the deceased's husband. Their journey changes the two ladies' lives. So, this is just classic Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin together in a film. It's fun, it's funny, it's riotous, it's light-hearted but also touches on deep subject matter. And if you're looking for just a fun movie to watch that will make you laugh, that is good for the whole family, this is the film for you, because it's a really lovely, light-hearted and easy film. Then next I have Erin Brockovich. Yes, I have never seen Erin Brockovich in my life until this year. But don't judge me for it, because it was one of my favorite films, and I understand why Julia Roberts won an Oscar for this role. So, in Hinckley, California, a legal assistant discovers a major company's dark secret that affects the health of the residents. With the help of her employer, she sets off to seek justice. This is also based on a true story. Most people probably know what this film is about because most people have probably already seen it, but I saw it for the first time this year, and it was a really great experience. I would watch this film again in a heartbeat. It's also one of those kind of feel-good films that you can just put on any time, and it's good for the whole family. And yeah, it's just a really good film, but it does, I think, accurately portray the subject matter and Erin's life and her kind of fight to get this company to admit to what they've done and to right the wrongs that they've done. And it was a really great film. I really enjoyed it. Next up, I have an animated film called Migration. A family of ducks decides to leave the safety of a New England pond for an adventurous trip to Jamaica. However, their well-laid plans go quickly awry when they get lost and wind up in New York City. The experience soon inspires them to expand their horizons, open themselves up to new friends, and accomplish more than they ever thought possible. This is another just really good feel-good movie, great for the whole family, really entertaining and also funny at times. And it's just a really sweet story. It's a really feel-good movie. Sometimes all you really need is a feel-good movie. Then, next up, I have The Boys in the Boat. During the height of the Great Depression, members of the rowing team at the University of Washington get thrust into the spotlight as they compete for gold at the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. This is also based on a true story, and it's about the rowing team, most of whom are young men who are not well off, who basically are on the rowing team so that they can have a place to sleep and food to eat, and are allowed to stay in university and finish their degrees. And through that, their kind of need and determination to do well on this rowing team and to win the Olympic gold medal is so much stronger, and it is such a well portrayed film, or such a well made film, that I think, I don't know how this slipped under the radar. I feel like it should have been nominated for some awards or something, because I think it's that good of a film. And yes, if you're looking for a historical film that's based on real life but is still light-hearted enough and inspiring enough, hopeful enough to not depress you, watch this film, because it will give that. The last on my list of films is 99 Songs. A musician must compose 100 songs in order to reunite with his lover. However, his journey of heartbreak, redemption, loss, and faith allows him to discover much more than love. This is I guess you could classify this as a Bollywood film. I don't know how to classify Bollywood from not Bollywood films, but I think this is a Bollywood film. A really interesting story, a really compelling story. It's quite a long film, and there's a lot that happens in this film, but I think what the filmmakers of Bollywood are so good at doing, because they make so many films and their films are all quite so fast-paced, they are really good at making a complex story with lots of twists and turns and lots of things happening throughout, not confusing and enjoyable to watch and all of those things. And after watching this film, I have decided to take it upon myself to watch more Bollywood films, because I found this one really great, and I would love to discover some more great Bollywood films. So if anybody has recommendations for a Bollywood film, please let me know. Now, moving on to series. The first one is Hacks. It is a comedy series. A strange mentorship develops when a legendary comedian struggling to hold on to her dwindling empire hires a young unemployed writer to liven up her material. This is starring Jean Smart and Hannah Einbinder, and the back and forth kind of poking fun at each other that these two have, and the banter and all of that, makes this such an enjoyable series to watch. And still, somehow, it touches on really important subjects and really heartfelt moments. And if you're looking for something lighthearted and funny to watch, I would recommend this one. Then I have 4 More Shots, Please. 4 women from different walks of life face several issues, but stand together through all their problems while giving each other advice and a shoulder to cry on. This is also an Indian series on Amazon Prime Video. It is described in some things that I've read about it as the Indian version of Sex and the City, and it is kind of like that, but also different, obviously, for obvious reasons. It's a different culture, it's a different time, it's different people, different characters, and they have different issues. I wouldn't say I enjoyed the whole series as a whole, I enjoyed the first season very much. The second and third season not as much, but the first season I would say is a pretty good season to watch. So if you're looking for something different to watch, give this one a try. Then next I have Hotel Portofino, which is another historical fiction series. The daughter of a wealthy industrialist moves to Italy in the 1920s to set up a quintessentially British hotel in the beautiful town of Portofino, as Benito Mussolini's brand of fascism was on the rise. This is such a beautifully made series. Everything from the location, even though they didn't shoot it in Italy, but from the establishing shots to the locations, to the characters, to the costuming, to the hair and makeup, to the everything. It's just so beautiful, and actually a really interesting story, much more so than you would think from just what you hear in the description. It's not quite as simple as that. Next I have Lost Tango in Halifax. Celia and Alan, two former childhood sweethearts, are widowed and in their 70s. When their grandsons add their details to a social networking site, they find each other and rekindle their love. That is the main point, I guess, of this series. But what I find so interesting or so great about the series is that you get to know about all of their, both of the main characters' separate families throughout the series as well, and all of their kind of struggles and how they're all connected to each other and how they interact with each other. And it's all just actually quite comical, and it's just a testament of British humor being really good, really intelligent humor. And I don't know, the Brits know how to make a good series, I feel like. Then I have Ted Lasso. An American football coach is hired to manage a British soccer team. What he lacks in knowledge, he makes up for in optimism, determination, and biscuits. So obviously, for any Brits watching, it's an American football coach hired to coach football. But he has no idea. He's never coached football or soccer, as it were, before in his life. He has no idea about any of the rules of the game. He doesn't know what any of the terms are, anything like that. But still, he gives it his best try. And even though the owner of the football club kind of hired him so that he would fail and so that the club would do badly for her own personal reasons, he manages to do all right, and everybody starts to get along with him, and it's a really just heartfelt story, and everybody loves each other at the end of the day, and it's quite funny as well. And what more can I say about it? So many people have raved about Ted Lasso. I finally got around to watching it, and I'm so glad that I did. And I'm so hoping that they do end up making a fourth season, which it seems like they are going to do. But I really hope that they do. Then, last on my series list is Harlots. Margaret Wells, a brothel owner, decides to extend her business to a rich clientele of Soho, London. However, her decision lands her in direct conflict with Lydia, a rival madame, and her ex-employer. So this is set in 1800s London, so I think it starts in 1763. So lots of big dresses, lots of big hair, lots of powdered faces and white wigs, and lots of vulgarities from the harlots, and also from their clientele actually, but mostly from the harlots. It's quite a funny series, but also at the same time, I'm not a historian or anything, but I feel like it mostly accurately portrays what life for harlots and boards and the nobility and the people who were considered the law, like the magistrates and all of those people, was like in the 1700s. Man, I can't even describe this to you because it's so complex. There's so many little subplots that factor into the whole story. But if you are inclined to see people in very white faces and pink cheeks and powdered wigs and big dresses, lots of cleavage. Then give this one a watch, because I think it will not disappoint you. Now I'm talking about 2 documentaries. The first one is Made You Look. Filmmaker Barry Average chronicles the events of the largest art fraud in American history, when Knoedler and Company unwittingly purchased and sold fake works by famed artists. So that's basically what this thing is about, but it focuses a lot on the curator of the gallery at the time, and kind of tries to figure out whether she knew from the start that these were fake works and was trying to sell them to people so that she could make commission on them and all those kinds of things, so that she would benefit from, or whether she also did not know and only found out once everybody else found out that these were fakes. Then I have Nothing Like a Dame. Together, they're 342 years old. They're in their 7th decade of cutting-edge, epoch-defining performances on stage and on screen. Funny, smart, sharp, competitive, tearful, hilarious, savage, clever, caustic, cool, gorgeous, poignant, irreverent, iconic, old, and unbelievably young. Special friends, special women, and special dames. A chance to hang out with them all at the same table at the same time and enjoy sparkling and unguarded conversation spliced with a raft of archive. So this is I don't know if you can really call it a documentary, but basically 4 dames who are good friends, or were good friends, and got together on a regular basis, allowed their get-together to be filmed, and that was the resulting, this documentary was the resulting thing. So it is the late Dame Maggie Smith, Dame Judi Dench, Dame Eileen Atkins, and Dame Joan Plowright, all together at the same table. And if you know any of their acting works, and if you have ever seen any interviews with any of them, you can just imagine how entertaining this would have been. Then, lastly, I have a short film. I got into watching short films this year, mostly on YouTube, actually I think exclusively on YouTube, but I watched a couple of them, and this one was my favorite. It is called Guests. In 1972, a Nigerian woman hosts her English colleague for dinner in the hope of getting her prideful husband a job. So that's a very brief description of what it's about, but it's about racial tensions between black people and white people in the 1970s in England, and the kind of unwillingness of this woman's husband to work for a white person because he wants to not work for a white person because of his pride or something. I don't know why, but that's what it says in the description. So, and I think it covers the subject really well, and all of the actors were really good, and the set design and everything again was impeccable. And I really hope that the person who made this short film makes more things in the future. I would actually need to go and look up this person and see if they've made anything else, because I think they are a really good director, and it was written really well, and the actors were really good as well. And I will leave a link to it in the description down below if any of you want to go and watch it. It's only 14 minutes long, so it's not that much of your time, and it's a really good film. And it shows just how powerful short films are in conveying a message in such a short space of time, and how difficult it is to make a really good short film, which I think this one is. That all said, that's my favorites of the year. I know I've been blabbing on in your ears for long enough now, so I will let you go. But if you have any favorites, books, films, series, documentaries, short films, anything, podcasts even, I didn't mention my favorite podcast, but I only listened to one, then let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear that, and I will see you all again next week with my end of year wrap up. Cheers.